group stage of the Hearthstone World Championships is finished, with 16 players battling it out in best of 7s last week, narrowing the field down to a top 8. After over 100 games, matches filled with surprises, and rounds ranging from 4-0 sweeps to even a player coming back from a 3-0 deficit to win, the final 8 that will compete this weekend at Blizzcon are, from the Americas, Sidonia, Amnesiac, and hotMeowth; from Europe, Dr. Hippie and pavl; from China, Xiao and Hamster; and from Asia Pacific, chonu. As the Hearthstone community prepares to enjoy what is looking to be an exciting quarters, semis, and finals at BlizzCon this weekend, we'd like to present a quick overview of the 8 players, the opening round matchups, and observations from the group stage that were intriguing. By bringing together data from all the games played during the group stages, the following data could help predict what classes will be played, banned, and what we might ultimately see in the players' lineups as they resubmit decks for the final rounds. The top 5 win rates by class panned out as follows. To the surprise of some, Shaman was by no means the most successful class. This may have to do with the fact that while it was the most banned class, players who chose not to ban it may have been targeting it. But this is certainly one observation that makes Shaman in a conquest format a class that can be easily handled by its opponents. Rogue, Warrior, and Mage actually brought home the best win rates, with most of the warriors comprised of control-style archetypes. The most banned class in the group stage wasn't exactly surprising. Shaman was banned in most matches, and then a few others banned here and there. However, it'll be interesting to see in the top 8 rounds if the mid-range Shaman frequency in lineups persists, as the class was intensely banned, and then when not banned, harshly targeted by its opponents, dwarfing its win rates relative to what would be expected for the most powerful class in Hearthstone. The bracket for the top 8 showdown was seeded according to HCT point earnings from the seasons. The way this panned out made for some very interesting matchups for the quarterfinals. We can look forward to seeing 2 highly anticipated NA vs EU showdowns with nearly trademarked names in both, Amnesiac vs pavl and hotMeowth vs Dr. Hippie. If you're interested in the players' full deck lists, you'll find links in the description below. Amnesiac is perhaps the NA favorite going into the tournament, winning the very first seasonal championship and then choosing not to even continue in his rounds for the second seasonal prelims because of scheduling conflicts with important family events. He is commented by many professional players in the NA and EU scenes as being far and away one of the strongest players on Hearthstone. You can see in Amnesiac's choices for decks for the top 8 that some slight adjustments have been made. He's opted for discard lock in place of his control warrior from the group stages, and he's teched into Sylvanas in his Malygos Druid list, reflecting a tech choice also made by Tice in the group stages. If anything, for Amnesiac, the pressure comes mainly from the form of having to live up to the expectation that he'll have to defend the dominance that surrounds his name. pavl is the perfect candidate for an enticing opening round versus Amnesiac. While in the initial rounds, NA players were undefeated and EU players could hardly muster a win, the storyline of the back half of the group stages was the resilience of EU players, pavl being the paradigm for this. Dropping a 4-1 series versus hotMeowth and battling back through the lower bracket, pavl found himself 0-3 versus Omega Zero, needing to beat Malygos Druid 4 times in a row in order to survive into the top 8. He pulled off the dream. With a calm, untilted, and completely focused demeanor, pavl made the 4-game streak comeback to knock out Omega Zero and advance to BlizzCon's top 8. Clearly, being up against the wall and at a disadvantage doesn't faze pavl in the least. And there's perhaps no storyline more intriguing to challenge the total dominance attached to Amnesiac's name so far than what we find in the character of pavl. It looks like pavl will bring the same 5 decks and lists that he piloted to victory in the group stages. It's worth noting that he's the only player who didn't make any changes. The other NA vs EU match features Dr. Hippie vs hotMeowth. Once again, we see a parallel NA-EU theme developing. hotMeowth displayed nothing but dominance in the group stages, advancing in just 2 rounds with an 8-4 win rate overall. While many of his comments and even posts on Twitter indicate his nervousness, and that his nervousness has led to misplays and poor lines of play overall, the results don't speak to this at all. At this point, his win rates in the seasonal championship and now in the group stage should allow us to consider him a dominant player and a favorite going into any field. We can see that hotMeowth has chosen to bring Discard Warlock in place of his Secret Hunter. In addition, don't overlook his new warrior list. He's going to be the only player in the championship to run an Arcane Giants Blood Warrior deck. This will make for an entertaining and refreshing addition to the tournament viewing experience. Dr. Hippie is another story of comeback and resilience. After moving down to the lower bracket in the group stages, he battled back in a grindy fashion, netting a 9-9 50% win rate, but moving past Yulsik in the elimination round 4-2. Dr. Hippie is another player who's opted for discard lock in place of Secret Hunter for his top 8 deck submissions. He's also moved from the Control Warrior to the re-emerging Dragon Warrior. In his mage deck, he has removed the Ragnaros finisher and replaced it with Archmage Ananitas. The remaining 2 rounds and 4 players of the Blizzcon top 8 are Sidonia vs Chonsu and Jason Xiao vs Hamster. Sidonia and Chonsu were frequently dubbed by the Championships caster as dark horses of the tournament. They both seem to be a bit less known and less anticipated, but continue to have success up against any field in any tournament environment. Sidonia is the 3rd competitor from the NA region. In the group stages, he boasted the 2nd highest win rate, taking an 11-5 69% win rate to make it to the top 8. Sidonia's deck lists for the top 8 competition are mostly unchanged. However, perhaps in light of how the different Control Warrior variants played out in the group stages, he's moved from the Cthulhu Warrior variant to playing the Death Rattle Heavy N'Zoth Warrior for the top 8. Chonsu is the other dark horse of the group stage. He coasted through Group B with a quick 2-0 in the upper bracket and an 8-4 win rate overall. Most interesting about Chonsu's storyline were a few of his deck decisions. He chose to bring Dragon Warrior and Discard Zoo to the group stages, a decision that brought a lot of critique from the casters as they overviewed his lineup in the early games. Chonsu's lineup for the top 8 features a surprising addition of Healing Wave to his midrange shaman list, a card that opponents will have to consider as they work to knock out a deck that usually doesn't restore their hero's health. Also, he's opted for Secret Hunter in place of his Tempo Mage. Both Sidonia and Chonsu are players that could come front and center in the spotlight at the semifinals should they advance. At that point, their win rates and successes will parallel any others in the field. The Jason Xiao vs Hamster matchup could perhaps be the most surprise-filled round of the bracket. Both players brought some interesting decks and card decisions to the table in the group stages, and both players had incredible successes in their matches. Hamster shocked the Hearthstone community with a few of his lineup decisions. He was literally the only player who brought Paladin and Priest to the group stages, but the lists of Paladin and Priest he equipped were surprising in and of themselves. His Paladin was an Anyfin and N'Zoth Paladin, and the Priest was a N'Zoth Control Priest, running none of the mid-game Resurrect options. He would be hard-pressed to find a more control-oriented version of these two classes. As promised in his post-game interviews, Hamster has chosen to return as Paladin and Priest's champion. His top 8 lineup features all the same classes, hoping to battle it out with N'Zoth Priest and Anyfin Paladin. Interestingly, the other 7 players made adjustments that could anticipate Hamster's anti-control lineups. While his Paladin and Priest excel in control matchups, the others seem to be moving to more mid-range archetypes of Warrior. While overshadowed in deck creativity by Hamster, Jason Xiao made some very interesting lineup decisions as well coming into the group stages. Jason was one of the few players who ditched the typical 5 powerhouse lineup and opted for Miracle Rogue and Discard Warlock instead. Jason Xiao has decided to bring the same 5 classes as he did in the group stages. However, consistent with many others, and perhaps in response to the fact that Hamster's Paladin and Priest lists can prey on Control Warrior, Jason Xiao has chosen to bring Dragon Warrior in place of Control Warrior. This is another round to look for interesting and unexpected lineups, and perhaps even more left field type of card decks in the top 8 bracket. There are perhaps more people engaged in the Hearthstone World Championships than ever before, and the variety, character, and storylines behind the top 8 players has helped to build the hype. The significant differences in prize money for the players that stagger between 8 and 1 at BlizzCon piles on the pressure for the competitors and the intensity for the crowd this weekend as they battle it out for the Hearthstone World Champion. Don't forget to tune in as the quarterfinals start at 12 o'clock Pacific this Friday.